A new report claims the housing crisis is costing Sydney $10 billion a year plus as people and businesses look elsewhere. So this is according to a report that's released today, and Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, is going to be talking about this as well. Joining us live now, in the meantime, is Eamon Waterford. He's the CEO of the Committee for Sydney, who's responsible for this report. Eamon, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. So just elaborate on that figure. So unaffordable housing costing Sydney $10 billion a year plus. How do you come to that figure?
Yeah, so we've estimated the cost to our productivity, to talent acquisition, and to our innovation economy. So relatively hard-nosed economic data that we're looking at here. And we've estimated those costs when you add them up from unaffordable housing costing Sydney more than $10 billion year in, year out. Now, that's not even taking into account things like commute times that are impacting on people's family lives, or loneliness, or many of the other stresses that come with unaffordable housing. This is just hard-nosed economic data saying that we're having a significant economic burden from not solving the housing crisis.
So, put simply, folks just basically going to other cities. And so those other cities are enjoying the benefits that Sydney could have had our housing been more affordable.
Absolutely. We're hollowing Sydney out, and there's a risk for Sydney beyond the fact that Melbourne's going to start beating us. If we can't be a city where teachers, nurses, cleaners, hospitality workers want to live or can afford to live, the reality is we'll hollow the city out and it won't function very well. And we've seen this happen with cities around the world. San Francisco historically obviously been the home of the startup, but increasingly it's not anymore. Startups are going to places like Austin, Texas, like Seattle, because San Francisco has become too unaffordable. And once you don't have startups in San Francisco, well, what have you got? You've got entrenched street homelessness. You've got uber wealthy people enjoying a very good lifestyle, but not a very well functioning economy, and not a city that you'd necessarily be excited to move to.
So second in the world, how far off the top spot are we?
Well, Hong Kong's pretty extreme, but we are still in an incredibly unaffordable place. And I think it's important to recognise that people in Sydney probably feel like the frog that's been boiling in the water. This is normal. This is not normal. We are experiencing a median multiplier, which means that people have to spend their entire average salary on a house 13 years in a row in order to afford the average house.
Sorry, Eamon, just on that. Yeah, so the debt to income ratio, it's an important factor here. What is it?
So it's 13.5%, 13.5 times for Sydney, which means, and the median income needs to spend their annual salary 13 years in a row in order to afford the median house. Wow. Put simply, the average income earner can't afford the average house in Sydney. So something's out of kilter in this city, and it has dire economic consequences.
Okay, so what, in your view, needs to happen, Eamon?
We've got to build a lot of houses. That's the basic point we've got to start with. We have to build a lot, more than we've ever built in this city in any one year, but every single year for the foreseeable future. Now, that's in line with the federal government, the National Cabinet's housing targets, 1.2 million nationally, and it ends up being 77,000 for Sydney. We've also got to make sure that some of those houses are what we call key worker housing, social and affordable housing, basically housing that's allocated to some of these cohorts that we know won't be able to afford to crack the housing market, but are really important for the long-term prosperity. So your cleaners. A city doesn't function without good cleaning. The reality is, we need all of the lawyers and all of the professional service workers and people like me, people like you. But the reality is, if we don't have cleaners, the city grinds to a halt. So key worker housing as part of that housing, but fundamentally, let's build a lot of it.
So Chris Minns, the New South Wales Premier, he's going to be speaking on this and probably other issues as well later on today. But do you think there is a will? Do you think there is a will? I mean, the government's had its housing fund knocked back at the moment and still pushing ahead with that. That's on a federal level, but it has kicked in billions to the states. I mean, do you think that there is a will to up housing now from what you've been able to see in the recent weeks and months?
I think there's a growing recognition from politicians that this has become a politically red hot issue, right? That they can actually win votes on housing. Historically, I don't think governments have seen housing as something that's a vote winner, or at least taking action on the housing market in the way that they're talking about now. Chris Minns is absolutely keen to go on some action in the housing space. He's clearly made the number one issue for him. He's talking about we need to go up, not out. We need to have a massive rezoning. Everybody's going to have to get used to the idea of density, but hopefully density done well designed density. So I think there is political appetite. Now, Obviously, when the rubber hits the road and it actually means putting apartments on leafy streets in communities that haven't experienced change in recent years, it becomes a bit more politically fraught. Local members will start arcing up, backbenchers start arcing up because it's their local communities that are affected by the change.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of space to move on this, but partly that's what we wanted to articulate with this research is the scale of this problem is so great. We actually do need great impact, great change in order to see effect on this issue.
Well, there's rental stress as well. So if nothing is done in the short term, Eamon, where does this lead? We'll close here.
Well, the reality is Sydney is on a trajectory to hollow itself out. And that economically means that we're not going to be as thriving or as functioning as we are currently. Sydney's always been successful because it's an attractive city, not just beautiful, but attractive in terms of attracting smart people and attracting capital. We won't be able to do that if housing remains unaffordable, and we are on the wrong trajectory. So if action's not taken, I think we will see economic strife ahead for the city.
Okay. Eamon Waterford, appreciate your time. Thank you.